Hello and welcome to this video. Today marks the last part of my journey in making sewing weights. Now both of these ideas I actually got from the comments, so thank you to these two people for giving me these ideas. So the first one is actually making a tiny sewing kit. As you can see, I did not only use ball bearings this time, I also used curtain weights, and that is just because I've run out of these ball bearing type weight things. And the curtain weights have a lot of weight to them also, and they also work in resin. So to make this sewing kit, of course, we need some sewing supplies. So I'm starting out with some Sculpey. This is Sculpey medium, and I'm going to basically just sculpt some scissors and some seam rippers. Now for the scissors, I do have a reference, and the way I sculpt them is mainly just for presentation purposes. So I'm actually sculpting them mirrored, because when I lay the blades on top, it hopefully should sit flush. If I would make like 3D scissors, I would sculpt them as normal scissors are, which is just basically like the same part, just overlapped and overcrossed on the back. But in this case, as I said, I mirrored the blades just to make it look better when it's glued together finally. And then I spent a good 15 to 20 minutes sculpting these handles. It doesn't look that difficult, but I struggle going back and forth, just getting the shape right. All I did was basically just make some noodles, blend them in, and then try to get the handle shape. And then lastly, I'm making a tiny wormy delay that I cut up from one end, and then I indented slightly with my round dotting tool, and that is just to make space for the needle part later. Now, of course, we need some thread in our sewing kit, so I'm going to make some underthread bobbins, and I'm also going to make some normal, like, tiny thread spool thingies. And for the underthread bobbins, I used my hole punch, and I'm basically using this to cut out cardboard circles, since they're pretty small. And then with super glue and just some normal, like, toothpick skewer type things, I'm trying to glue the inside on. For some reason, these things were very stubborn. I did use activator, and it just didn't want to hold to the cardboard as much as my fingers. But that is always a struggle when working with super glue. But in the end, I got it to work, and I made 3 spools. Now they aren't perfectly centered, but that is totally fine. I can orient them however I want, and since you can only see them basically from the top and a little bit from the side, it doesn't really matter. Now, first of all, we of course need to paint them before we wind them up, so I'm gonna start with some black, and then to get the metallic, I'm just going to put silver on top. And while the different layers are drying, I'm also winding up the little thread spool. So I'm just using some PVA and the thread colors. I wanted to go colorful, so instead of the boring black and white, although I'm gonna use white for the bombs also, I decided to go with this like nice dark green and a red tone. And once all the spools were finished, actually the clay was also baked, so I could work on the scissors. And all I did was I basically glued the blades together, trimmed them up a little and glued them to the handle. And for the seam ripper, I actually did use a real sewing needle from a sewing machine and I clipped it up. Now, if you ever do this, be careful, wear eye protection. These kind of things can fly far and they can injure your eye pretty badly. I actually wore shop glasses for this just to protect my eyes. And then it was painting time. At first I wanted to give the seam ripper a metallic handle, that is why I painted it black on the base, but then I decided I'm also going to go blue for this one, so I just painted over it, and then I just gave the the cutting part a metallic sheen by adding my silver paint. And lastly, I'm also adding a tiny piece of skewer to mimic the screw hinge that scissors normally have. And of course, the classic sewing kit needs a cookie box. It has kind of become a meme that if you open up a cookie box, there's sewing supplies in there. So of course I had to integrate that. So I'm using the same cardboard I used for the spools, and I'm just cutting out a circle and a tiny strip of it. I'm adding some glue and I'm going to glue them together. Now I struggled a bit to get this part to hold, but eventually I used my weight block I use for gluing and just held it. And then to strengthen it, since this glue takes a little while, I put a tiny drop of super glue along some points and I used my activator to activate it. And after the other glue was also dried, I could finally paint it. Now, of course, cookie boxes are metallic, so I'm going in with a black base coat again, just to unify everything and make sure the colors pop. And then I noticed that there was one point that was loose, so I fixed it with my super glue again. And basically what I want to do is make this look rusty. So after the black is dry, I'm going to go in with this leather brown. All the paints I'm using here are Vallejo brand, by the way. And I'm just going over the black with this brown, and then I'm going over it with a gray, which is gonna be the base color for the metallic silver. And I'm just dabbing it on, leaving actually a lot of the brown and spots behind where it makes sense, so at the seams, on the rim, usually where rust would accumulate. And afterwards I'm just stippling on the metallic silver, and that makes it look like it has rusted in all the edges, as you can see, but it still has this really metallic sheen to it from the metallic paint. I did blend in the rust a little bit more and intensified it a little bit more on the inside, and then it was time to paint the outside of it. And here I wanted to go for a chip paint effect, so I started off with a base coat of this dark red, and then I went in with the blue finer color, before deciding that I wanted a bit more rusty than it looks like, so again went in with a bit more of the rust paint. And that is the cookie tin, or the part of the cookie tin done, which means we can finally assemble. So basically this is just gluing everything in, positioning everything how I wanted to. I did dip one of the points of the seam ripper in red paint just to mimic the tiny ball that prevents it from cutting through the fabric on the one side of the seam ripper. And then I just added all of the bobbins and all of the thread spools just where it would look the best, but parted a little bit. And then I realized, of course, every good sewing kit needs a measuring tape. So I just cut a strip, this time of paper, and then I painted it yellow. I dipped the edges in silver, and then I just used a normal pen to draw on all of these tiny lines. They're not fully accurate. The larger lines are a bit more accurate because I used my ruler, but the smaller ones aren't. It doesn't really matter though, because in the way I'm gonna present it, it's more like the optics that count than it being totally exact. And then after all the markings were done, I applied some PVA glue and I rolled the tape measure up like they would normally be in any sewing kit. And then I just glued it in place in a shape that I thought would actually look good and fill the space a little bit. And lastly, I cut up some wires. This is just very thin silver wire, it's very soft. And of course, this is for the sewing needles, so I'm gluing some in without any paint, and some of them I dipped the heads in some paint. And that is going to just give it the colors if it was pins. Now I could have mixed up some wood glue or something and mixed that with the paint and like let that dry. It leaves more of like a texture, or I could have used resin. But honestly, it looked more than enough when I just added the red paint on top. So that's what I did. And then lastly came the nerve-wracking part, pouring the resin. I went very, very, very slow. And the one thing I immediately noticed is that one of the edges of the cookie tin is a bit too high, but that is totally okay. It's gonna be covered in resin, and if there's a little bit sticking out, it doesn't matter. So what I actually did for this one, I babysitted it, and like every 20 minutes I popped all of the air bubbles that would rise from underneath the tin and all that, and it turned out pretty much perfectly. But of course, like in every part, we also gonna make a second one. And this idea was basically putting my character in there. Now I'm gonna change it up a little bit from how my character usually looks, because first of all, it needs to be flat enough to fit in the resin. And second of all, it needs to I wanted it to look a bit more like something. So normally my normal character icon is like just a fluff ball, like in basically fox colors and a fox tail and fox ears. But I wanted to add tiny hands and legs to make it look like it's laying on its back. So I'm just spending a lot of time sculpting the snout, and then I'm going in to sculpt the ears and then the eyes and of course the tail. And lastly, I'm also going to add tiny hands and feet. For the colors, I'm starting off with brown base tone just to give it a clean slate for all of the colors to like look good on and like pop a little bit more. Since this is gonna be orange, I like to do a brown base coat just to make it pop a little more, when normally for like other colors I would probably rather choose a black base coat, but the brown really makes the orange pop and I only need one layer to make it look good. And then of course I'm going to blend in the tail white, and I'm also going to add the white around the snout part. And the ears and the hands are gonna get like a dark brown tone for all the accents, and the nose and the eyes are going to be black, just with some tiny white highlights around the eyes. And also, since we have the feet showing as they are, I'm also going to add some tiny pink toe beans, and I'm going to add some pink into the ears, just to make it look a bit nicer. And to make the texture pop out a bit more, I'm going to give it a like dark brown wash. And I'm just brushing it on, letting it dry, and once it's dry I'm going to give it a matte coat, and that is just because it has a lot of texture and I don't want the resin to bubble up on the character, so this clear coat will help just to smoothen out the surface a little bit. Now for the base, I'm actually going to pour it in 2 layers, so I'm going to go in with like a very dark brown black tone with the sewing weights in it. And then I'm going to mix up some sand and colorant and resin, just a tiny bit of resin, and I'm going to put that on top. Now, I know there might be some air gaps on the side just because this mixture is very stiff and it will not like resin run into the edges, but as long as the layers bond it should be totally fine. And then it's time to actually add in my little character, so I'm just gluing that down, and just having him lay on the ground doesn't look fun, so I'm also going to add some static grass. Normally I would thin out my glue with a little bit of water, but in this case I just applied it straight out of the bottle. I am not really going to paint any base coats, I want the dirt to show a little bit, and then I'm using some 6mm nylon grass with my grass applicator, and after that's dry I'm just shaking the grass off, and then it's time for the resin. I'm just basically pouring the resin in very slowly again, and this one actually had way less air bubbles rising than the sewing kit, luckily. I guess because the grass is very fine and actually moves in the resin a bit and doesn't capture as many air pockets. But I definitely do have some side gaps, but those I'm actually just going to fill with some modeling clay later. But it is not like interfering with anything that touches the fabric, so it should not be a problem at all. And here you have the final result. I am absolutely in love with both of them. I think both of them look so adorable. Like, the tiny details in the sewing kit just came out super nicely, even in the resin. I was afraid that the resin might obscure like some of the details. It totally does not. And the tin really looks rusty and all that. I think I like captured the like feeling of an old sewing kit pretty well. And the fox character just also looks so adorable with its like tiny toe beans and it just laying on the back. Of course it looks a bit flat, but you know, just pretend it's like relaxing and like sleeping, basically flattening itself on the floor. just very cozy, but you know, that's just space restrictions, but I still think it looks so cute. If you're interested and you missed the previous 2 parts, I'm going to put them in the description down below, so feel free to check them out. And this project with this is actually finished, so I now have all my sewing weights that I will need to like hold down my patterns while I'm tracing them onto my fabrics, and I'm super happy with all of them. They work so well since I've already used them for some projects. And you know, they're easy to pick up, easy to move, but they're pretty sturdy and they are just all adorable. All of them are so different and I love all of my sewing weights that I made so far. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below which of these sewing weights is your overall favorite, and if you could choose a design for yourself and like make a sewing weight, which kind of design would you go with? I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!